the PlayStation Vita, Sony's second venture to the handheld market, as well as the successor of the PlayStation Portable. However, unlike the PlayStation Portable, the PlayStation Vita didn't exactly see a strong marketing presence, with only about 10 to 11 million units sold worldwide. That's not to say that the numbers are a bad thing, but it is a far cry from the units sold of the PlayStation Portable. Not to mention that most of the games on the Vita, you can also find them on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 as part of cross-buy, cross-play. Now, it's obvious during that generation that the 3DS would be the dominating handheld, and don't get me wrong, I do enjoy both playing the 3DS and the PlayStation Vita. However, I don't play the 3DS that much, apart from a few niche titles, or in this case, games that are obscure to the public eye, such as Project Cross Zone 1 and 2, which I hope to see a remaster for the Switch, but I kinda doubt they would do so. While it's true that most of the games in the library are also available on PS3 and PS4, the library of the Vita is not that bad. I mean, I actually enjoy playing them on the Vita more so than in the main consoles. Not to mention the fact that the PS Vita is also region-free, as I can also play Japanese games before they could even be released on the US, or not at all. And the PS Vita itself has a strong cult following within the modding community.
The PS Vita may not have done well sales-wise, and their losses may have been big, but give credit where it's due. Their library of games are actually playable, and at least they're willing to experiment things just like the 3DS did with some good features. Not to sound like a fanboy or anything, but what I'll say next is the harsh truth. I mean, I like both the 3DS and PS Vita, as I also like their predecessors as well, but realistically speaking, it's not like one other company that doesn't even have its own handheld to experiment with. For an FYI, tablets, smartphones, which also includes that company's recently discontinued smartphone, and their respective controller attachments don't count as handhelds.
My, I'm so envious of the others. Here I am without a sister to embrace me after so long.
Which is why in today's video, I will be focusing on the positive side of things. Because today, I'll be naming my personal top 20 PlayStation Vita games. Why top 20? Why keep things on top 10 when you can double down? The road to the PlayStation 5 continues here in this countdown that I call Top of the Game Chain.
Just like the last video, there will be some rules that are altered or be added in. Beginning with number 1, only one game per franchise with some exceptions. 2, some games within the same series that play in different genres or subgenres will be counted. 3, imported games are welcome as the PlayStation Vita itself is region-free. 4, compilations are welcome. 5, many games in the Vita are multi-platform, and if I play them first on the PS Vita, then they will be counted. And finally, 6. This is not an official list whatsoever. These are just my personal picks, so don't take them too seriously. In addition to all of that, I will also give credit to some websites and YouTube pages for some of the footages on certain games, as some of the games in this countdown are not compatible at all with the PSTV, and I don't have one that is modded, let alone a modded PS Vita. So let's begin the countdown with my first entry. Starting things off is a very simple yet very interesting platformer called Thomas Was Alone, originally released in 2010 as a web browser game made from Adobe Flash. You control a simple red rectangle called the Thomas AT23612, an artificial intelligence routine component who is among many AIs in the computer mainframe that somehow gained personalities and self-awareness following a sudden malfunction within the mainframe. While people will say that graphics will be an aspect that defines a game, Thomas Was Alone shows that it's not always the case, because what I find interesting is that Mike Bethel, the creator of the game, would have the idea of having simple shapes be given distinct personalities to tell a simple story, which to me is very effective, and the extremely soothing soundtrack complements that vision. The only controls you have in the game are just moving and jumping, and your goal in each stage is to guide Thomas to exit points in order to advance to the next stage. And along the way, Thomas will meet with other shapes like an orange square named Christopher, a long yellow rectangle named John, or this large blue square named Claire, just to name a few. Each AI that Thomas meets has their own abilities, and the other premise of the game is that each shape has to reach their respective exit points in unison by working together. While very simple, it's a very neat puzzle platformer, and I do find the narrative very interesting to listen to as he describes what the shapes are thinking. If you love solving puzzles, this is one game that I can recommend. Speaking of shapes and platforming, here's another simple game that emphasizes those two words, called Sound Shapes. While it doesn't tell a story like Thomas Was Alone did, Sound Shapes has you controlling a circle with an aura surrounding it. When you start the game for the first time, it gives you a tutorial teaching you the basics of the circle's controls. The graphics may be simple, but the game has a nice premise. Since the game has a musical focus, whenever you collect coins that you see in each stage, you'll hear more instruments and beats coming from spots that you collected each coin from, and each stage would have a different music genre, each of them very pleasant to listen to. Whenever you complete a stage, you'll also gain some customizable items that you can use in creation mode, where you can create your own stage and play them yourself, and you can share them online with other players. There are also other modes in the game like Beat School, where you are given a certain number of notes that you must place in specific areas of the grid in order to recreate the tune given to you, which is a nice puzzle mode. The game has some really good beats to listen to, and if you purchase some DLC, you can also play some stages with other beats, whether it be 80s, 8-bit, acoustic, or browse sound, just to name a few, and some celebrities contributed some of their personal beats made for this game, like Beck or Deadmau5. This game is mostly for fans of platformers who want it simple but also engaging, and in my opinion, with its musical motif, this game is very easy to pick up and play. I previously talked about shooters like Gradius in my PSP countdown, and because I also grew up playing old school shooters in the past, here's one arcade style shooter worth playing called Resogun. The game itself is heavily inspired by the old arcade shooter from Midway, Defender, and give it a more futuristic twist. Your goal of the game is to defeat waves of enemies and then the boss in cylindrical voxel-based arenas. Before starting your mission, you have 3 different ships to select, with each of them having varying levels of moving speed, the strength of boosting, and the effectiveness of your overdrive attack. Aside from destroying enemies, you can also gain points from saving the humans on the field and take them to a rescue point, not only to score points but also gain some power-ups like enhanced lasers or a Nova Bomb for a screen nuke. However, you have to defeat a certain number of keepers before you can free one, and you gotta do it fast before they perish. The controls of the game are responsive, but as you can see, I do tend to go all frantic as I try all I can to not get myself killed. I do like the whole 2.5D aspect of the game, and with battles happening in a cylindrical arena, makes it easier for me to see who might be shooting or charging at me. This game is definitely one for fans of shooters, and it's an easy game to pick up as well. I previously mentioned Ghosts and Goblins in the last countdown, and here's an indie game that pays tribute to it, called Cartagena EX. The setting is in the year 1081, where demons from the Netherworld have found a way to escape their world and start attacking the innocent in Reino de Castilla, and upon hearing the news, the king has sent the protagonist, Don Ramiro, and his team to stop the demons and save the land. As mentioned, the game pays tribute to Ghosts and Goblins, mostly the sequel Ghouls and Ghosts, as Don Ramiro can fire his attacks in 4 directions, which is a good thing, as just like the G&G series, enemies will no doubt start charging at your general location. Even many of the demons behave the same way as the aforementioned series. However, unlike the G&G series, the game has more than one ending, and the ending you get depends on what you have Don Ramiro do throughout the story. Don Ramiro can sustain up to 3 hits per life, and he has 2 squares, his primary weapon and his support item, which can range from a fairy being your attack option, or boots for a double jump. However, unlike G&G, if you get killed, not only will you lose your support item, but your weapon will revert back to a sword. In addition, picking up another support item will override the other, so there will be times that when you think you still have the double jump, you'll realize too late when you fall down the pit. Despite the difficulty, I had some fun with this game as both the gameplay and graphics give out the feel of Ghouls and Ghosts, and the sound presentation sounds reminiscent of the Sega Genesis sound chip. If you like Ghouls and Ghosts and its gameplay engine, this game is for you. Just be prepared to get killed a lot. Here's a unique RPG in this countdown called New Little King Story, which from what I researched is actually a reimagining of Little King Story for the Wii. Credits go to Let's Player ZetaMage, as footage of the game belongs to that account, as this is one game that is not compatible at all with the PSTV unless it's modded. You're in control of a young man named Korobo, who stumbles upon a golden crown that upon wearing it, gives him charisma that suddenly attracts people and he's able to command them as his own subjects. Your objective in the game is building up your kingdom and bring happiness to your citizens. You can command some citizens to establish some houses and other buildings, farm for crops, and dig for treasure. As it is also a real-time simulation, you also gotta keep in mind as to who's capable of handling the job, as well as keeping track of your finances when expanding your kingdom. However, you're not just limited to just building your kingdom alone, as you'll also have to do some exploring outside of your kingdom with soldiers at your command, battling monsters and digging up more treasure. You'll mostly be commanding your soldiers to handle the fighting for you, as Korobo himself is very frail, and the game ends if he gets killed. Eventually, when you build up your kingdom to a certain level, other kingdoms will issue a challenge against you, and it's up to Korobo to go and attack a rival territory, and add the land to your own if successful. The visual style and character art look wonderful, the game's soundtrack is pleasing on the ears, building your kingdom, although grind heavy, is satisfying since you're in command, and the combat is very reminiscent of a certain astronaut on the GameCube, which I can accept because it's fun to play. This game is worth checking out if you're interested. When it comes to games inspired by the NES, some elements that developers would implement would be high difficulty and unexpected surprises, and this game, 1001 Spikes, is no exception, especially after I tried the game out at Anime Expo years prior. You're in control of Aben Hawkins, an archaeologist who travels to South America to explore a temple to retrieve his estranged father's legacy prior to his father's disappearance. You'll be going in many areas of the temple, moving obstacles, and finding a key in each stage before reaching the exit. It may look simple, but this game will no doubt challenge you. As the title implies, obstacles would come in the form of automatic retracting spikes, and some spikes will appear when you step at a certain spot, and you won't realize that until it's too late, as you get killed with one hit. And other hazards include getting crushed, or get stung by scorpions, just to name a few, and when you die, you'll see this screen. A lot. There are golden skulls in each level, and they give you an extra life upon collecting one, and there's a reason why you start the whole game with 1001 lives, because this game will gradually get harder the more you advance, and you will get killed a lot, with the same sentence repeating as if it's giving you a vulgar expression. You know, since this game has no voice acting, I'll give this screen a voice. Rewind!
You are dead!
There we go. I definitely dig the 8-bit style graphics and sound, and the controls are smooth for the most part. It's similar to other games like Super Meat Boy, as it's mostly trial and error, and you have to do what you can to plan your best course of action and memorize the stage patterns to survive or else lose more lives, and eventually your sanity. So if you're a fan of Super Meat Boy and you want a game with similarly challenging obstacles, this game's got you covered. You just gotta make sure you don't start losing your mind when you get killed a lot. Oh, and one last thing.
You are dead!
And here we have the first Neptunia game in the countdown, Hyperdimension Neptunia U Action Unleashed, and it plays in an entirely different genre. As with any Neptunia game, you'll learn the story of each title by way of visual novel-style cutscenes, and they'll encounter more characters that bear significance to the game's plot, while also providing some gaming and media meta-humor that the series is known for. Instead of an RPG, Neptunia plays out as a hack and slash. You could say it's Dynasty Warriors, but with Neptunia characters, each with their own fighting styles and techniques. The stipulations for each stage varies, whether it's reaching a certain point of a stage to defeat your target, eliminating all goons in the stage, or defeat a stage with only certain characters among other rules, and you get to fight with one or two characters in a mission. I wouldn't let any enemy appearances deceive you, as they can be aggressive when you least expect it, and one mechanic in this game is that the more damage you sustain, or constantly performing a heavy attack or combo, your clothes will be damaged, and when that happens, you'll gain some EXE energy to transform and have a high increase in critical hits, but at the cost of your own defensive strength. More often than not, you'll be grinding for experience points in the same stage until you feel ready for the next challenge, as some levels will destroy you if you're below levels the stage recommends. The graphics are what I expected in a Neptunia game, as they're very colorful and vivid, the character models and art look great as always, the music remains the same, and as someone who has played Dynasty Warriors, this game is very responsive and it's great to dodge attacks very quickly. This game didn't waste my time at all because it's very enjoyable. Honestly, I didn't play much of Uncharted on the PlayStation 3. Don't get me wrong, they are great games, but I was way too occupied with other games in that console, and instead, I watched some walkthrough videos on how the story goes. It wasn't until I got the PS Vita, and later the PlayStation 4, that I would check out the series again, beginning with the only game in the series for the PlayStation Vita, Uncharted Golden Abyss. And by the way, credit goes to the site World of Longplays, as it is another game for the Vita that's not compatible with the PSTV unless modded due to touch controls, which is very strange since the PlayStation TV has the option to turn on PS Vita touchpad controls on your PS4 controller. Anyway, I'm not going to spoil the story for those who are just getting into the series, so I'll go straight ahead with everything else. You control Nathan Drake, going through a series of levels like jungles and temples and solving puzzles along the way. While exploring, you can have Drake climb on ledges and jump on different platforms to reach another, or find hidden passageways with treasures that you can collect. When in combat, you can take part in cover-based shooting when facing a large group of enemies with a variety of weapons that you can find in the game, or in some scenarios, you can perform stealth takedowns to avoid conflict and save ammo when needed. While the controls are no different from past games, one unique feature is the game's touch control function. You swipe the screen with your fingers to help Drake balance in tight ropes, perform some melee counterattacks similar to QuickTime events, or solve some puzzles that requires the function, and for the most part, it is responsive. As expected with the series, the graphics are created beautifully even for this handheld, and the sound presentation is top-notch, not just on the music, which is wonderfully composed, but also the voice acting. With such a great adventure, Uncharted Golden Abyss is worth having in the Vita in my opinion. From the makers of Guacamelee comes this first-person dungeon crawler RPG called Severed. Also, shout out to BlueMaxima's gaming channel for letting me borrow his footage for the countdown, as this is another video game that can't be played on the PSTV unless it's modded. In this game, you take the role of a one-armed woman warrior named Sasha, who is in search of her family after they were taken away by demons, and she goes into battle with a living sword with a demonic eye, and uses it to slay her enemies. I will say that when I played the game, the story itself is very morbid. What I mean is that the story would eventually get darker, not only from witnessing events of her journey of rescuing her family, but also from Sasha's own character, as the more demons she kills, you would see some change in personality, from docile to highly obsessed in an instant, and it's that kind of tone that has me continuing to play the game. The game is set in a first-person perspective, but is reminiscent of old-school dungeon crawler RPGs, as you go from one different area at a time, instead of moving freely. The way the game works is that you're not using buttons to attack your enemies. To attack, you'll be using the Vita's touch controls. However, you can't just swing your sword wildly because some enemies will have ways to defend themselves, and you have to wait for the right moment to drop their guard and counterattack. Once their HP goes zero, you can slice off a demon's body parts, which you can use to create new equipment for Sasha, as well as upgrade her performance and sword to increase her versatility in combat. I find the graphics of the game really nice, as the style was done in the same vein as Guacamelee, and the music of the game really fits not only with the setting, but also Sasha's motivation in the game. The touch mechanics will take some practice, but it's satisfying once you master it, and it's a good recommendation to try out. Speaking of games with dark stories, here's one that's just downright sad that it piques your curiosity when you're playing it. From the studio that made Disgaea comes A Rose in the Twilight. I will first start off by saying that the game's graphics and the use of the only colors, white, black, gray, and red, really brings the tone of suspense and sadness, and the good, albeit gloomy soundtrack, complements the game's setting immensely. You control a young girl named Rose who finds herself alone in an old castle covered with thorns, has a mysterious rose flower behind her that can somehow bring things to life, and the whole world has time completely frozen. She would eventually befriend a golem known as the Giant, and the two work together to figure out the mystery of the castle and of herself. The game is mostly you solving puzzles to get from one area to the next by utilizing the abilities of both Rose and the Giant and absorb hidden bloodstains of dead inhabitants in order to see what led to their fates. As Rose, she can use the flower's ability to absorb and store the color red from an object and use it on another object to give it life and open up a path for you to advance. Once you control the Giant, it can walk through thorns, pick up objects in order to help both Rose and the Giant to proceed to the next room, and he can throw objects and Rose when traversing through obstacles that may be fatal. With such a good gameplay concept, a very somber but good soundtrack, and such a melancholic theme, this game will have you playing for hours, not only solving some puzzles, but also give you so much feel for the story, and I like it. Definitely worth playing on the PS Vita. Next we have another game in the Neptunia series, only this time starring my top waifu from the series, Noir, in Hyper Devotion Noir Goddess Blackheart. As I mentioned at the top of the show, games within the same series that play in different genres or subgenres are allowed, and instead of being a traditional RPG, this game plays out in tactical RPG form, which I'm usually not a fan of, apart from a few titles like Project Cross Zone. The game still maintains great artwork for the characters, but the in-game models are designed in chibi form, which is very adorable, making them very reminiscent of figures called Nendoroids, and I do collect those depending on the game series, and if there's one based from Neptunia, you can be sure I'll immediately put a pre-order on it. You can expect some more meta humor, not just on the 4 CPUs, but also the other characters in the game as well, as many of them as well as their actions and personalities are references to various video game franchises. You're controlling characters in a tactical grid map. Some arenas have different elevations, and map elevation has an effect not only on how much you can move, but also the abilities of each character. Some characters can climb up some terrain better, and characters can take fall damage if you decide to just rush in rather than descend carefully. Before you start a mission, you're given a chance to select characters as participating units, equip their weapons and accessories, and assign who the leader of the unit will be, and whoever you assign as the leader will have a passive leader ability which affects all characters in the field. Similar to some, but not all tactical RPGs, like Project Cross Zone, the battle system is separated into player and enemy phases, where each side takes turns in moving characters and performing actions. Another tactical RPG trope is that characters can also be affected by status ailments that would alter their performance, and victory conditions may differ depending on the mission. Aside from having your typical MP moves, a mechanic exclusive to this game is the Lily Boost, which involves adjacent units developing special bonds that grant special skills and abilities like stronger attacks, or the 4 mainstays and a guest DLC character named Tiara from Fairy Fencer F can transform into their stronger forms to increase their attack power. When doing so, animations of characters showing their affection are displayed whenever some number of characters are next to the person performing the move, which will result not only filling up the Lily gauge, which is this game's EXE drive gauge, but the more characters surrounding the person performing the MP or EXE move, the greater the power the special move will have, and only less Lily energy is required to perform a desired EXE move. The gameplay is actually really good, and it's one of the few tactical RPGs that I would replay, and what's great is that when you complete a mission, you can replay completed missions again using the load simulation option in the hub world, which you'll definitely want to do as the game will gradually get harder, though it's a good idea to purchase all the DLC for an easier time. I had a fun time playing this tactical RPG, and if by any chance you don't have the game or the Vita, this game is also available to play on Steam. If you played Castlevania Symphony of the Night before, here's a game with a near similar concept. La Mulana EX, which from what I read is a remake of the 2005 PC game of the same name from Japan. You're in control of an archaeologist named Lameza Kosugi, who explores the ruins of La Mulana after receiving a letter from his father telling him of the secrets he's found before disappearing, so it's up to Lameza to find his father and uncover the mystery. Yeah, that's 2 archaeologists in the countdown, the first being Ab and Hawkins in 1001 Spikes. The game plays similarly to the non-linear Castlevania games, but upon further reading, the game actually pays tribute to Microsoft of Japan's MSX console, which I still need to collect, as well as the console's adventure platforming games from the 80s by having the distinction of hard difficulty and having limited information on how to progress with the game. Because of this gameplay design, the idea is to explore and solve as many puzzles as possible before getting low on HP, and head back to camp if things become too threatening or if you lack the necessary items that you need. Lameza will start off with a whip and low HP, but as you progress with the game, you'll find more items that can either open up new areas or grant new abilities for Lameza. He can also collect money from enemies or jars that you could use to purchase some items or weapons back at the camp. So you'll definitely be grinding for cash a lot in this game, because going through the game blindly without taking the time to get yourself situated will likely get you killed fast, and that's what I like in games like this. I find this game enjoyable overall, as well as the use of 16-bit style graphics, but if you're planning on getting this game and it's your first time playing, you might want to consult a guide first, just so you'll play through it fine. I've only played a few titles from the Tales series, but they do have interesting fight mechanics and really good characters. And here's one underrated title from the series, Tales of Hearts R, a remake of the original Japan-only game for the DS. The Tales series are games of the action RPG genre, and many games in the series would have gameplay split into 2 main areas, the field map and battlefield arenas that would occur when encountering enemies, and battles would usually be rendered and play out in 2D. In this remake of Tales of Hearts, the gameplay is now in 3D environments with character models that are fully rendered both in and out of battle. Much like later games in the series like Tales of the Abyss, the combat gameplay of Hearts has you moving your characters in a 3D arena, but like the rest of the series, you can manually control whichever character is highlighted, while the rest will be AI controlled until you highlight someone else and give out commands, and are done in real time. What makes the remake different from the original DS version is that it uses a redesigned battle system, and characters can perform a technique called Arc Chase, which allows a manually controlled character to follow an enemy after knocking one into the air and follow up with another combo attack, and you can also perform a cross attack with another character, which is done by selecting an ally at the right time while holding down the attack button, which is then followed with a finisher. Random battles are also in this game, and by pairing up certain characters later in the game, you can perform Union Arts, which are powerful team-up attacks. The graphics of the game look great and give you the feel of watching a good anime. Speaking of which, the anime cutscenes have good animation as well, and the game's soundtrack is very lively. This is one game in the series that shouldn't be missed, as the gameplay and story are excellent. If there's one thing to love about the Metal Gear series and the Tenchu series, it would be the use of stealth to fool your enemies and slip by undetected, and this game emphasizes that mechanic. Stealth Inc., A Clone in the Dark, originally a game for PC and smartphones before making its way to consoles. You're in control of a goggle-wearing clone going through a testing facility filled with hazards, traps, and robot sentries, which can result in an instant death if you're spotted by an enemy or armed security cameras. Your goal is to hack through varying numbers of computer terminals without being noticed in order to open up the exit and make your way through there. The game has 8 areas, each with 7 regular stages followed by a boss stage and 2 more hidden stages that can be unlocked if you're able to get all the hidden helixes in each stage, as well as getting rank S in each stage, including the boss stage itself, which is easier said than done. That's because when attempting to do so, you're not just solely relying on going through the stage undetected, but also trying to defeat the stage faster and not getting killed once in a stage are factors into getting rank S, and it must be done with just your standard clone, because using the unlockable clones, while their abilities will make the stage easier, you will never get rank S no matter what. So the whole game is trial and error, as later stages will have you testing your stealth skills even harder, and if you wish to get a high grade and unlock more stages, you have to study the behaviors of security and have good timing on slipping by. The gameplay is responsive and moves at a really good frame rate, and the game does the job well on the shading effects in order to make use of stealth, and the soundtrack really conveys the tension of using stealth, much like spy movies. Definitely a game worth having on the Vita, but if this game were to come out on the Switch, I wouldn't mind getting it twice there as well. Here's an action RPG made from the developers of Odin Sphere called Muramasa Rebirth, an enhanced remake of Muramasa the Demon Blade for the Wii. The game is set in the Genroku period, a time in Japan years after the Sengoku era. Word has surfaced when conflicts in the nation came over the possession of demon blades, which caused demons to emerge from the underworld and threaten the land, and it's up to Momohime, a princess who was possessed by the soul of a vengeful Ronin, and Kisuke, an amnesiac assassin, to stop the demons and save Japan. The gameplay is a 2D side-scrolling RPG, and exploration occurs through hand-drawn 2D side-scrolling environments that pays tribute to ancient Japanese art design of that era. The battles in the game come in two forms. They can either be random encounters or fights that are scripted and you are forced to destroy all enemies before advancing with the story, and in both types of fights, the camera is fixed on the area where the battle happens. Each character can equip up to 3 blades and you can switch between them at any time when confronting situations. Each attack you perform, combined with directional inputs, can result in different moves that you can use to juggle your opponents, and by collecting enough soul power, you can perform a secret art from the currently equipped blade. When not in battle, you can also regain some HP by eating at restaurants to also gain some spirit points, which in conjunction with soul points, are used to gain not only new blades from the swordsmith Muramasa, but also raise the performance of your chosen character. The art style of the game looks great, the gameplay is very fast paced with all the combos you can perform, and the soundtrack is beautifully composed as it was done by Hitoshi Sakimoto, who also did music from other games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy XII, and Odin Sphere. A worthy game for your Vita library. Even though it also came out recently on Steam, I know some people who played this on the Vita will be mad at me if I didn't add this game in the countdown. Persona 4 Golden. Unlike previous titles in the series, Persona 4 is not just an RPG, but it also has some elements of simulation as well. What I mean is that one of the gameplay features include the main character, who I named Yu Narukami as he's named as such in the anime, can participate in various activities and jobs to increase his attributes. However, you can't have him doing that continuously because you have a day cycle, and you also have to go inside a realm called the TV world in order to rescue characters and progress with the story, or risk getting a game over when the victim is killed and you have to restart from the last save. A major mechanic in the game is social linking, which is done by forming friendships with other characters, both playable and NPCs alike, and the more the bond increases, so will the rank of that social link, allowing you to not only create new personas, but also gain additional abilities in combat. As for battles, they only take place in randomly generated dungeons within the TV world, and battles begin by coming into contact with a wandering shadow, which turns into a different kind of demon, and the game plays out like any other Persona game, with the only difference is that you don't negotiate with demons anymore. Some mechanics from the first 3 Persona games are present, and the strengths and weaknesses of characters still depend on the equipment and the persona you have imbued from within. And whenever enemies are stunned, you can have your team perform a follow-up attack like an all-out assault. This version of Persona 4 is an expansion of the original game for the PS2 by adding in new features and story elements to the game, as well as additional personas, character outfits, expanded spoken lines, new anime cutscenes, along with 2 new social links for some other characters in the story, making it the definitive version of the game. I don't think I need to get far into talking about the graphics, audio, and more of the gameplay, if by any chance you've already played this game, because even though I like the first 2 games more, this game plays really well, and even though Yu Narukami is supposed to be a link between the game and yourself, as opposed to the anime where he's given a personality, I still find Narukami to be likable as opposed to Persona 3's main character, who I just want to punch him right in the face. Anyway, for those who never played Persona yet and might be your first time, this game is definitely worth playing. I gotta give another shout out to Some Call Me Johnny because aside from Guacamelee, it's his review of this game that also got me into playing it. Coming in at number 4 is Bastin, and not the character from Overwatch. It's an action role-playing game in which you control a character simply called the Kid, exploring different environments that are floating and fantasy-themed, and they would form paths whenever the Kid reaches an edge. The game is set in an isometric viewpoint, and the Kid can move in any direction. Enemies come in different forms, but they are immediately set on attacking the Kid the moment they appear. You can carry 2 different weapons at a time, a melee weapon and a firearm, and the kind you're wielding can be selected from choices available to the Kid inside buildings called arsenals, and each weapon has a specific ability that you can perform, which costs some tonics, which is your MP for the game. The Kid can carry a certain number of health bottles, and the game will prompt you to heal up when you're about to get killed, which is a good warning, just in case you're in way over your head, which does tend to happen in this game. You'll gain experience points from defeating enemies, and whenever you level up, not only will your stats increase, but you can also select an upgrade to equip on top of your base stats inside a building called the Distillery. Eventually, you'll come across a glowing core, in which by the time you reach the Bastin, which is the kid's base of operations, you can use the acquired cores to create structures like the Arsenal, Distillery, and other buildings with different functions that will help the kid on his quest. I find the narrative of the game being told well, with the game's narrator telling the story depending on the kid's actions, and I love the hand-painted art style in the environments, making it very vivid and lovely, despite the post-apocalyptic tone. Sound presentation is great, mixing spaghetti western music with some beatboxing, which is welcoming. A fun action RPG worthy in this countdown. I played my fair share of survival horror games, but when I saw the gameplay of Lone Survivor, I thought to myself that I'm playing Silent Hill in 2D, so when I tried it out, I realized that there's more to it than that. The game is set in retro-style 2D graphics, which look impressive, and in certain areas there are heavy uses of fog, which is no doubt inspired by Silent Hill, and there are many backgrounds that look freaky and lifelike, which are also inspired by horror movies. Combine that with the game's soundtrack, the game does its job of not only conveying fear and suspense physically, but psychologically as well, as it also messes with your head to the point that it's hard to turn off the game because you want to know what plays out next. In this game's post-apocalyptic setting, you're in control of a protagonist who wears a face mask, and by following instructions coming from his apparent hallucinations, will you proceed with the story. As you explore the apartment and the town later on in the game, you'll come across items like food, or keys and other important items to solve puzzles in your journey. You do have a pocket flashlight to see through the darkness, but use it sparingly as it drains batteries, and you can find some batteries by scavenging in different areas. The game has two plot devices, surviving through the chaos and your character's state of mind. You'll eventually encounter some mutants that are lurking about, and they'll come right after you by being attracted by the flashlight or if they smell you're nearby. You'll eventually get a pistol, but ammunition is very scarce, and you gotta hide in the shadows and slip past them so you don't get killed. Even without mutants in the game, you also have to take your character's state of mind into account, because even if he hasn't taken any damage yet, that doesn't mean he's in good health. You either feed him with food like snacks, or gather some items and properly cook some better food to eat. Sleeping in his bed helps your character from going insane and is the only way to save your game. What makes the game so good is that there's no linear plot. What I mean is that when I played the game with a guide, which is very necessary, the story and the ending you'll receive depends on the character's actions, whether you killed mutants or how much you interact with the other NPCs in the game. This is an underrated horror game worth playing in your Vita, as it gives you a chance to play the game in a way that makes you curious on what would transpire next as you perform some actions in some situations. It's a real hidden gem in my opinion. I've referenced Castlevania Symphony of the Night earlier in the countdown, and here's a game with a similar gameplay. Coming in at number 2 is Iconoclasts. As you would expect by my reference, it's a 2D action platformer with elements from that game, as you're in control of a young mechanic named Robin, armed with her trusty wrench, as she explores new areas within the planet and solving puzzles with her equipment, all while fighting off enemies that usurped the government after she was labeled a heretic. Throughout the game, Robin will come across different tools that will help her on her quest to solve puzzles and stop the usurpers. As mentioned, she is armed with a wrench that is very multi-purpose. Aside from being a melee weapon, she can also use her wrench to turn bolts and make things functional, grapple to platforms that are very far, or by absorbing electricity, power up some tools and objects. You can also find materials in treasure chests in order to create tweaks, and by equipping them, they can range from increased power or gaining different abilities, just to name a few, and as you progress with the story, you'll eventually recruit other characters that are also opposing the usurpers to your cause in some parts of the game. I will say that I really love the design of the game, as it's very rich in color, and the graphical style is reminiscent of the Game Boy Advance Castlevania games, only smoother, and the soundtrack is top-notch. When it comes to the gameplay of this style, you can expect so much backtracking, which I don't mind, because it always brings satisfaction when a new twist suddenly comes about. Iconoclasts is worth having in your library, and you'll be in for hours of exploration, and you'll get so much out of the game it's very excellent to play. So, what game earns number 1? Let's take a look. Yeah, I just had to. This series is my top reason to own a PS Vita because I can't stress enough how much I'm a hardcore fan of Neptunia that before they are re-released in Steam, each entry that I see in the Vita, I knew I had to get them, buy all the DLC of each game, and play through them religiously. In the last episode, I named Neptunia Victory as my favorite of the PS3 Neptunia games due to its streamlined combat system. When I heard about the first 3 games being remade for the Vita, using what functioned well in Neptunia Victory, I knew I had to get it and enjoy them. It was hard for me to decide which one I liked as they all played great, so I'll go hardcore and throw in the entire Rebirth trilogy as one whole entry for number 1. As mentioned, the Rebirth trilogy are remakes of the original 3 Neptunia games, all with elements from Neptunia Victory with some added plot elements, rework script, and a new mechanic called the remake system, which unlocks in-game modifications such as access to new dungeons, or unlocking options to make battles better for you and keep the pace going. With all these elements implemented in each game, you can play through each of them smoothly and you can perform powerful over-the-top moves at any time without having a handicap thrown at you, especially in Rebirth 3 when they do away with the EXE gauge and you only need just MP to perform overdrive or team attacks. Compound that with the aforementioned remake system, you'll be able to power up your team before you can even proceed with more events in the game, though it's still advisable that you get all the DLC in each game, because you'll need the extra help, especially when they also have great overdrive moves that do so much damage. There's really no need for me to talk about the graphics and sound, as they'll always be the same as the originals, but I will say that the whole trilogy is definitely more improved, and I can't stress enough that I would be playing these games for hours because they're very fun to play, and needless to say, it's great to hear the meta humor in these games, making the whole Neptunia Rebirth trilogy together as number 1 in my countdown.
And there you have it, folks, my personal top 20 PlayStation Vita games. Do you like what you see in the countdown? What games in the handheld do you consider your favorites? Feel free to leave comments below the video. Well, we're almost done with the marathon, folks, because up next on top of the game chain, we're going to be shifting our attention to the PlayStation 4, and I'll also be naming my top games for the console. I would like to thank you viewers for taking the time to watch this video, and if by any chance you find this video interesting as well as other videos in my channel, feel free to subscribe to my channel at any time if you haven't done so yet, as well as follow me on social media. Until then, this has been Muramasa X, and I bid you all farewell, take care, and stay tuned.